Welcome to the Lost Signals Reviews, the American Film Institute's Top 100, where we critique the supposed 100 greatest American movies of all time. Join us as we decide if they're worthy of the Mott's Top 100.
Or Mott's. Uno, dos, tres, catorce. Welcome to the Lost Signals AFI review of Vertigo. I'm Jonathan E. Manzer, here with Stephen Ramosi.
Hey, how's it going?
And Scott Thurlow.
And I'm spinning out of control.
So this is actually an interesting mixed reaction of to this movie, and which you'll hear all
You're
about.
about to hear at length.
Yes.
Number 9 on the list.
Oh, is it? Yes.
Is it?
I forgot to look it up
I forgot
beforehand.
It was that high
Yeah.
up. All right.
Number
It is
9.
considered by some to be the best movie ever made.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there's actually this British Film Institute, not the British Film
That's right.
Institute, but
It
one,
was on that list of.
put it number one.
Yeah.
And we shall see. So, Stephen, do you have our funny log line?
Yeah, so this is the movie that should have been called Falling Down.
True.
Mhm.
So many people fall in this. It's terrible. Okay, I'm going to give the plot. Now, this is not going to be a short synopsis like we normally do. I'm actually going to go in a little bit depth with the analysis I did of this film because I found it fascinating. This is a tale of two movies.
That should have been the logline. Fuck. Anyway.
Damn it!
The first
True,
half is a pretty bog standard film noir. A former cop kind of accidentally becoming a private eye. It says that he's offered the job and just go on, but he was never intending to. Played by Jimmy Stewart, who is Johnny or Scotty, depending on your relation with him.
Mm-hmm.
He's he's hired to basically follow the wife of an old friend of his who is acting strangely. She thinks she's possessed and maybe going mad.
And living a past life or something.
It's really kind of
It's kept unclear for this part.
purposefully, because in a way it's supposed to be a film noir in that I've seen film noirs with flimsier
Pretext than that.
this. And they end up falling in love with each other.
Yeah.
She attempts to throw herself in, or does throw herself in the San Francisco Bay, be rescued by Johnny, and then she does throw herself off of a bell tower of a distant church in the middle of a rural area. Big thing is that Johnny is fear of heights. He gets intense vertigo when climbing, so he couldn't reach her to save her in time. That's the plot of the first half of the movie. Now you find out that it was all a ruse, that the wife had been dead for a while, but was murdered at some point in this, and that the woman that Johnny was following was an actress who was hired. She was a kind of.
Well, I thought. Just a quick point.
Yeah.
I thought the point was he swapped out the bodies when she jumped off. Right. So since Johnny didn't see her jump off.
No. The actress was hired to play the wife.
But I could swear there's a line where the actual husband
He throws his actual wife. Yeah, he throws his actual
the dead
wife from
body
the bell
of the
tower.
actual wife. He strangles her to death at some point.
I thought it said he broke her neck before.
I think he broke her neck.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Sorry.
So
be clear.
Yeah, so he throws the wife's body off. Now Johnny's witness to that, to the wife's suicide, and he's clear. And you never see him again for the rest of the film. Or for the second part of the film, though, is what's very interesting to me. It's an analysis of Johnny, who's really distraught because he's an older man at this point, I think 50 or so. He finally found a woman he actually loved in his life. And he goes to investigate, I guess is reminiscing the past, and discovers the woman who was portraying the missing, the wife who theoretically committed suicide. So he starts kind of manipulating her.
But he doesn't know it's her.
Yeah, exactly. He starts manipulating this woman to resemble the woman he had fallen in love with in movie one, let's say. And
Part one, yeah.
they're in love with each other. She knows, he doesn't know. She's afraid to tell him because of the deceit. and he gets more and more kind of obsessive with turning her into the woman he fell in love with, not realizing it's the same.
Well, he
woman.
realizes at the end, I believe.
He does, but not to that point yet. Thank you for interrupting me.
Sorry.
Eventually, he realizes at the end that there was deceit involved. He forces her up into the bell tower, where a nun appears as the figure of death, and she falls and dies in the exact same manner to the death of the wife. So it's a complicated story, but here's the thing: is I don't think that Hitchcock gave two shits about the first movie. In a sense, the plot of it. He's not interested in establishing. He's interested in the second movie. He's interested in the downfall of this man and the madness this man goes in. Mm. It's all about what your identity is, and in a way they switch positions. Where, all right, so Madeline is Judy is the woman who's playing the wife Madeline. She's playing a woman who is mad, or going mad, and is possessed by a third woman.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And here, in the second part, Johnny is going mad because of the loss of Madeline. It's such a ambitious film because in the first part, Hitchcock has to establish two things. He has to establish that their romance is real to allow for you to buy the descent of Johnny.
Obsession later on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also the fact that Judy would allow him to control him because of love. And this is the thing, is that you have to believe that love from the first part in order to believe the negative ramifications of love in the second part. Mm-hmm. You also have to believe in, it has to establish the deceit and why she has to hold this from him. And a lot of people criticize this film for being very tedious in the first part of it. And I can see that. And I went through this saying that Jimmy Stewart was poorly cast for the first half because he doesn't seem like a hard-boiled detective like it's going. Then I realized this isn't about the film noir. The film noir is just a premise to get to the second half. And Jimmy Stewart does act very well in the second half as this kind of creepy, obsessive man. And which I think in real life...
It's what he does.
And I don't know, it's very fascinating to watch, at least to me, to watch the second half. And again, it wouldn't work without the first half. Maybe it could have been cut down a little bit. I don't know. Hitchcock is a much better filmmaker than I will ever be. But
sure.
But the thing is, like, I believe that everything, the poorness of the first part was necessary to establish the second part. So that's my thesis on it. And
all right, I'll say this. I agree that it's necessary to set up all of the first half to like get to the sort of juxtaposition, if you will, and the dynamic of the characters in the second. I guess the thing to me is, I'll bring up one thing. I believe in the credits it said that this story was adapted, like a screenplay was adapted from some original French novel. I believe that is the case. So like they're working with an already established story. Like it wasn't like Hitchcock and whoever like came up with the story.
It's a very different, I looked it up, it's a very different story though.
Okay, fine.
And I think that what he did, he got the ending from that book.
The rights to use parts of it, if not like the whole thing or whatever.
Yeah, about the idea of identity. And he ends up, I believe at the end of the book, spoiler for the book, is he ends up strangling the woman with the hair of, like a piece of the hair that he had found, or like a lock of hair from the first woman. So it's it's more morbid than...
That sounds cool though. Yeah. But no, like I guess the issue for me is maybe it's because I felt it was paced off. Like something was off about this film. I did not enjoy it. I'll say that right off the bat, and I'll go into various reasons why. Starting with the plot, I felt as if you said some of it could be cut. I think a lot of it could be cut. It could have been condensed and again spaced out better. Information could have been shifted around. I think when like one or two of the big reveals and so forth. And I have a lot more to say about the casting, as you mentioned as well. But it just felt off to me. It felt longer than the 2 and 10 hours that it is, and that's not a good thing to me. Like, if I was like intriguedly and invested into it, it wouldn't have felt like a slog, and it felt like a slog to me. And I guess that you said something like because it uses a noir type story as more of a framework than actually embracing it, like I was off put by that, or like I didn't like that. I felt it was a cheap trick. I felt as if it wasted the first half of the movie, all set up to get this other movie that like is yet nominally better, but it wasted my goodwill was spent by that point. So I did not enjoy watching the narrative of this film as a whole. I'm looking at a 1. I'm trying to be objective about it, but just like the way I felt, I'm like, man, what went wrong with this Hitchcock movie? There are other parts of it, yes, aspects that I think were positive, but the way the plot itself unfolded, and maybe it's because of the fact that he sort of had to cram these two stories together into one film and like cover all the points in part A to get to all the stuff that pays off in part B, maybe. But I just felt it wasn't executed, like, it felt haphazard.
I feel like we're in a Three Bears situation here.
All right.
I am, I think, kind of in the middle here. I enjoyed the plotting of this movie. I thought that it was plotted pretty well. I thought that the things in the first part, while, yes, not nearly as interesting, it was mostly just Jimmy Stewart following Madeline around, or who he knew as Madeline, around in a car for most of the first half of the movie.
Shit was boring, but go on.
Wasn't necessarily amazing, but I thought it did a good job of setting up a fairly complex plot, which this was, and I actually enjoyed the complexity of it. There are other things that I'm going to have problems with later on, for sure. But in terms of plotting, I thought that it did a fairly good job. I'm probably giving it a fairly strong 2, I would say. I think that the as you call it, the second movie was, while to my eyes a bit cringeworthy at times, was a really fascinating look at how these characters kind of understood their roles, and like so this is a movie called Vertigo, and this is all about kind of the not being comfortable with your surroundings. This entire movie is about not being comfortable with what you know and you know what you're seeing, and not kind of trusting yourself to stand on the two legs of what the plot gives you. And I think that it does a good job with that. There are points where I think it kind of drags a little bit, especially in the beginning, as you mentioned, Ian. So for that, I'm going to go with it too.
See, we all laud Hitchcock for breaking the role of the lead woman in Psycho. They kill her off midway through the movie, and then it turns into a different movie afterwards. This is even more audacious. He kills an entire narrative midway through the movie, and it's a movie where the villain wins. It's a movie where plot threads go. What?
Does the villain win?
I think he does.
The first part.
He gets away with his fucking crime, dude.
I mean, how do you know that he gets away with it? It's basically over at that point.
Well, the movie doesn't address it either way, but it's implied. That
narratively, to our knowledge, he gets away unscathed. There might... We'll get to that. There might be a supernatural element to this with the woman in the painting.
And I love that introduction of that, too.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, you don't... This is Hitchcock playing around with narrative quite a bit to an almost infuriating level, and in Scott, a literally infuriating level.
You're quite right, sir.
But I like that, and I think it's, even if it doesn't work, it's bold in a way I don't see very often. So I'm going to give it full points for that, for just the sheer chutzpah,
the audacity of it. Perhaps. I guess I'll say this as a final joke, but sort of relevant. Too much Verta, not enough Go. Like, too much dead water, like treading water. Like, again, all the elements of this narrative, like on paper, should work. And you're right. We laud Hitchcock for like playing and twisting with what you can do with narrative and what your expectations are as an audience coming into a story like this. But I think here it fell pretty flat to me. So I'm going to stick with a 1.
An A for effort
Yes,
for me.
but not for execution for me is all.
An E for non-execution.
Mhm.
Steve, I'll do with themes.
All right, so there are interesting themes of, I think perhaps the most interesting theme of identity in this, like the Madeline / Judy's deception, Johnny / Scotty having two names and like being known as different people to the other people that he speaks with. You have his, I guess in the beginning, kind of his understood personality, who you meet him as with Midge, his friend, and then that kind of twists when he meets Madeline, and then it kind of twists even further when he meets Judy, and he becomes this basically psychopath who is just turning Judy into his ex lover.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who was Judy all along?
Not even a stalker. He didn't have to be a stalker because she just let him do it.
Yeah, fine enough.
But I think that's a strong theme in this film, is the idea of like, who are these people, what are they about, and because especially Johnny / Scotty and Judy / Madeline both have different personalities that they inhabit throughout the movie, depending on who they're talking to, what role they're playing, etc. That plays a little bit into the title theme of Vertigo, of just not really being sure what's...
Like losing your footing
exactly. Not being sure and being a little bit scared to jump into the next role that you're trying to play. And like for Judy / Madeline, it's like looking back at her role as Madeline and realizing little by little as the movie goes on, gets towards the end, that she has kind of painted herself into a corner, and at the very end of the movie she realizes that she is thrown in with this lunatic who's going to throw her off the top of a goddamn bell tower. And in terms of Johnny / Scotty, it's him kind of losing his, like, going more, here's Johnny, and less, hey, I'm Scotty.
Scotty doesn't know, as always.
Yeah, Scotty doesn't know that he's about to commit murder. And like losing himself in this past love that he had, convincing himself that murdering this woman is okay because she deceived him. It's a. I think that the themes of this are fairly strong, and I'm probably going to go with a 1. I don't know if you guys have any different themes or want to go.
I do a little bit.
I got 1 or 2.
It's kind of a branch off of what you were talking about, but it's in a sense the pitfalls of love, in the way that Judy, you mentioned precast, that you felt she lacked agency in this.
I think everybody lacks agency.
But I'm going to just 2 segments, which when she first meets Johnny / Scotty as Judy, she has the option of fleeing, which she decides against.
Well, not when she first meets him. After he leaves, she has the option of fleeing.
Yeah.
When she first meets him, he corners her into her room.
Yes. And then...
Which is super uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. It certainly... but she has the option of fleeing, and she decides not to. And she has the option of also writing the note explaining, which is part of the fleeing scene, but explaining the deception, and she chooses not to. Because... And I think, again, this is to the thing that their relationship had to be established. You had to believe that
you had to buy into
they
that
could have fallen in love.
Sure.
Or at least what they thought was love, which turns out it wasn't.
Right.
But and that, in that sense, she, with her agency, she decides to give up her agency. And throughout the entire movie, she is, aside from that, basically one scene, she's either manipulated by Gavin or she's manipulated by Johnny / Scotty.
Well, at least let yourself be.
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't disagree with anything that you guys said. I think actually I did appreciate the themes, and I just have a couple sort of ties in again, all in one big kind of loop. But facing your fear, overcoming it, and extent, certainly Jimmy Stewart / Johnny is the obvious one there, but even like Madeline to a degree, and like Judy was basically a con woman who then had to like deal with the fact, like, if you recall, one of the sort of like sub meta narratives is that she was pretending to be possessed by an ancestor who went mad and was cast off by a rich lover, and that's essentially what happened to her, as she explains to Scotty. That's why she's back in the apartment where he finds her as Judy, because Gavin has cast her away, like a la the fictional like history of her supposed ancestor. But also like the duality of man, duality of humans, man, like who you are, who you think you are, and like I said, facing like when that's sort of confronted and you aren't who you think you are, if you will, or become someone different, but yet still try to reflect back upon the person you were beforehand.
This one's quick on, you just reminded me. Going back to love for a second, though, it's Johnny / Scotty did not. He was in love with Madeline, but when he met Madeline under different circumstances, Judy, he couldn't love. So it was a surface level
it was like
love.
The idea of love, if you will, more. So yeah, but I think certainly all that stuff was very obviously and not haphazardly versus the way I described the plot. I think it was very nicely woven into the story, and that it was clear, and you could see that without being overwhelmed by it. So I will give Themes a 1.
Yeah.
All right, Scott, on to you with the antagonist.
All right, so I guess the problem then now devolves into, shall we pick one out for each part of the two separate but related narratives that make up this movie? Because of course in the first one, I would say, like, I guess I'll try to do that, and you guys tell me if you agree, disagree, or what else you may have for antagonist. In the first one, it's Vertigo itself. I guess I want to say it's a joke. Like the whole setup, like very first scene is a very noir chase scene with a rooftop chase with a criminal, and that's where Jimmy Stewart Scotty sees his fellow officer fall to his death, which leads to his retirement from the police force, and then he's recovering, blah blah blah. And that's what also at the end of the first narrative, what prevents him from witnessing, like they exploited his fear to enact their little scam essentially.
So the way to beat your fears is to have sheer rage.
Yes.
Apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, obviously. But not like, so then again, like then he figures out, at least towards the very end of plot B, if you will, that Judy is in fact Madeline, and even though he's still kind of lost in the depths of his obsession, because he's trying to reconcile the fact that they look so similar because they're the same person. Bend it just like him because you are him, right? So like that,
deep pull.
yeah. But so like then he struck, like as a character, he certainly grows and changes. There's a transition period almost where he's like implied to be in an asylum or like institution for a while, right? Like dealing with like the fallout, if you will, after he witnessed her death.
That's when Midge finally leaves him.
Yeah. So we'll get to that later. But I mean, like, I don't know, like maybe all the themes we just said, like some of them, like dealing with the pitfalls of love, as you point out, Eva, like what the lengths you're willing to go to, and like it may drive you to like unreasonable acts and ways of thinking and logic and so forth. So like I certainly think they were, if we call Johnny the protagonist, but I think we might, at least even perhaps along with Madeline / Judy. So certainly he was antagonized by something, right? He was trying to figure out, he's basically trying to be a PI, like whether or not this lady can be going mad, right? There's an explanation for, the church you saw in your dreams, you've been there before, I've seen you go there, right? Mm-hmm. He's trying to rationalize what's happening to her, and also to himself, of course, at the same time, to a degree. So I think it's like, maybe a nebulous thing like that for the first part, and that carries over a bit when it switches narratives, but certainly then he's dealing with the betrayal and the hurt and the deceit that comes with figuring out that person you assumingly loved and who loved you has deceived you in a pretty big way.
See, this is weird, and now I guess we're going to have to combine antagonist protagonist for what I'm going to say next.
Sure. Is
that I think one of the brilliant things about this film is there's a definite shift in who you're following for the story.
No, I agree.
The Johnny, certainly the protagonist for the first half. And I think Judy becomes the protagonist for the second half. You start really following her story along. And I guess Gavin would be the antagonist for the first half
in theory,
in traditional sense.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And then Johnny is certainly the antagonist for Judy in the second half. And
so even you're saying they kind of switch roles, or like revolving door playing each part?
I think that's one of the brilliant things about this is that the person you were following and theoretically rooting for all of a sudden becomes the villain in your to the story.
I'm the bad guy. How'd that happen? As time to fall down. But you're right. Like having you said that, like I do think it's a bit more effective than perhaps I thought upon viewing.
Mhm.
But I do like that angle, and I can see it, and I buy into it quite a bit.
Yeah, it's tough. I wasn't going to say that he was the antagonist of the second part of this movie initially, but I might now. Because
I think there's some solid
I think there's a
reason there.
an argument to be made that he is the protagonist of the whole movie, and you're still following him in the second half. Just it's his descent into being a fucking asshole, and you don't want him to be the protagonist, right? Like,
that's pretty well said.
I think maybe being a fucking asshole is the antagonist in the second half.
Don't be a dickbag.
Yeah,
I suppose.
but it's difficult to say. You're right. You do follow Judy more in the second half, but I don't know if you follow her more than.
All right, think of it this way. In the first half, it's like 70% him, maybe 20%, 30% her. In the second half, it's maybe more of a 50-50 split.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Or at least closer to being that.
The thing is, it doesn't really matter all that much, I guess, to my score, because I'm going. There is this sense of just dread and shittiness throughout the entire movie. I think that, like, especially in the second half. I guess not so much in the first half, although
because it's more.
You realize when you're watching the first half of the movie, you realize that something weird's going on. You don't really know what it is exactly until you. And this is. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but this is my first time watching Vertigo.
I saw it once a very long time ago. I don't remember it being this bad. That's all I'm going to say.
But like it's there's. I didn't know what to expect because I hadn't really heard much about it. Strangely enough, I try to keep up on movies, and this is like one of the highest rated movies ever.
So it seems.
And I don't know how to place the protagonist exactly, but I can, or the antagonist exactly, I mean, but I can absolutely say that there was antagonism happening throughout this movie.
That's probably the best thing I think we could say. And
yeah, I mean, there's this sense of like something bad is going on.
Even if they switch, switch as characters. I'm sorry, Steve-O.
I'll give them one for that
because I really like what you said there. Even if we agree they switch as characters, it's effective. And even if they're like being antagonized by like life or again like the decisions they're struggling with in the situations in general, they're still struggling, with it. And I think it's a well portrayed struggle regardless.
Yeah. All right,
This one's all around.
I think so.
Huh?
Okay, now on to me with protagonist. I kind of like what you were saying about how Jimmy Stewart is the hero throughout.
I wouldn't call him a hero.
Well,
protagonist
perhaps. Throughout. Well, he starts off as a hero.
Yeah, sure.
Now, he lived long enough to become...
to see himself become the villain.
And
how many references can we do?
He is... here's the thing is, it's weird. I think I mentioned this earlier, but as a film noir hero, for the first part of it, I really didn't buy it because he's too Jimmy Stewart for that role.
Yes.
I liked him in
he was much better in Rear Window.
Because he's supposed to be kind of a smarmy, I don't know, like, he was just, it didn't work for me until the second half when Jimmy Stewart was exactly the actor who was needed to play this older, creepy dude who was controlling this woman. And he played that really well.
He's going to kill that poor woman.
So many references. I don't know. He was downright, like, not terrifying in the horror sense, but terrifying in the
unsteadily
I could
menacing.
see this happening in real life.
Yeah.
I certainly agree with that. I guess here's the issue is I just don't like Jimmy Stewart, as has well been established. In case you're not familiar with that, I don't like Jimmy Stewart all that much. But the funny thing is, as you guys said, like, it kind of is fitting because of how it works, because of how the second narrative, if you will, is set up. The thing is, you said something like nobody in this film has any agency or something like that, Steve-O. What did you said it in the review
I did
earlier
say that,
or
yeah.
like precast? So like,
And Ian brought up a good point that perhaps we'll talk about in supporting characters. But.
So I'm trying to get past my initial bias against Jimmy Stewart as a person and actor in general. And I do like how you said like he's more fit for the second like part than the first. Yeah, I think it'd be funny if like they cast someone else, but he was still supposed to be the same like character. So like this one's harder for me because, like I said, I'm trying to narratively analyze it, but without I still can't disregard completely my distaste and dislike for this person who then bleeds over into the character, but it makes sense to the character as well, as you guys just said. So it's really tough. Like I'd give him a 1 a 0 in the first part and a 1 in the second. Even though he's a creepy dirtbag, but like it makes more sense and he's better at doing that. So like it's tough. So I'll leave it there. I'm leaning towards a 0, but I'll can be swayed by your guys' perhaps convincing arguments. So hit me.
I'm going to give him a 1 for this. I think I don't hate him in the first part, but like you said, he's kind of a sack of nothing for a lot of
He's
it.
your old bumbling, what do I do now? I don't know.
Let me go drive around and follow Madeline around. Yeah,
exactly.
I'll go save him from the ocean, from the river. But then he...
So much Dewey Cinema.
Apologize, folks, but
no, you got me into it. You got me doing it. But then, in the second half... And it's difficult to say that I'm going to give him 1 for this because I don't like him in the second half.
Right, but we've decided.
But that's the entire point. Yeah. But why? So like, it's hard to give a protagonist 1 to somebody that I absolutely hate because it's the point that you're supposed to hate him.
Well, he becomes a villain protagonist, as we just said, so he can still be like a distasteful, like I said, a character you don't like, but you're still like you're following along with the story. And
but I'm still like there are things where like there are villains where I'm like, oh yeah, like. I hope this guy loses, but I fucking like what he's saying.
Yeah.
Or like I like what he's doing with the character. In this, I'm like, I fucking hate this guy.
I think there's a way to parse it.
Okay.
If it's the director's intention that you hate that character, that's a well put together
and they
character.
portray it as such.
If you're supposed to like a character and you
don't,
hate him,
then that's a failure.
Sure, but if what my problem with that is, if you're supposed to hate him, doesn't that play into the antagonism of the role, and doesn't that kind of make him an antagonist?
I initially said that. You're the one who argued.
I know. That's why I'm having problems with this.
Now he's struggling with it internally as well. He's got his own vertigo of analysis.
I'm probably going to end up giving this a 1. It's a 1 under protest.
Here's the thing. The reason I think that Hitchcock is a brilliant director is we're having these kind of conversations about the work.
That's completely fair.
You have created a character that, whether you liked him or not, is supposed to be a likable character at the beginning. Now you despise him and you're like, but was it even worth it to take this travel if I have ended up in this position?
And I don't take anything away from... Well, I take some things away from Hitchcock, but not for this reason. In terms of this movie. I agree. I think it was a great turn for a character, especially in such a you see turns like this in like over seasons in TV shows, like good TV shows or things like that, and like the fact that he did it in 2 hours is pretty incredible. And I'm just gonna stick with a 1. I'm gonna give it a 1 I'm gonna give Jimmy Stewart the protagonist. I'm gonna give him a 1. And possibly think about this later and hate myself, but for now,
all right.
You're going to do that anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
It reminds me of 2 things. We recently did Vice, so it's like, should we count Dick Cheney as like a villain protagonist, etc.? Right. But I like what you said. Like, I am going to give it a 1 in a day, but somewhat reluctantly, as you said. 1 under protest. Like, But I think you guys made a solid enough argument, and to get past again, like I said, my own bias. That it does work, and I like what you said at the end there. If it was intended as such, or if it and it comes off, then it will gain credit, and I will give it credit, at least here. But I wasn't going to initially, so well argued there.
All right, Steven, on to supporting characters.
Okay, there's one supporting character that is the only reason that I'm going to give this a 1, and I think Ian, you're going to agree, and I think Scott, you're going to disagree. Midge.
Correct. I disagree. Go on.
She's somebody who is in the first half of the movie, and she provides the whole turning point, really. Like, when you see her turn, that's when Jimmy Stewart turns. And she is, like, hopelessly in love with him in the beginning.
I thought it's implied, sorry, before you go on, that they were like former flings, like former lovers.
Yeah,
right?
at some point
they were going to get married.
Okay. They were going to get married, and then for some reason it didn't work out, which isn't fully explained. And then, and she's just holding a flame for him. But she's also, what I like to see about her is she's also, it's not like that's her only thing.
Defining
in this
trait,
movie.
sure.
She's also like designs lingerie and is an artist and has this, granted, glossed over to some degree, but fulfilled life that she's living outside of him, which is good to see. And when he goes into the into the psych ward and he's catatonic, basically, she says to the doctor, well, he's still in love with this woman, and then she fucking disappears and never comes back. She kind of like leaves his life.
She's
of her own volition, which is good. Like, It's not like he casts her aside or anything. She realizes that it's not going to work out, and she leaves and doesn't come back.
Yes, she does.
Well,
what?
I believe you actually see her again at the restaurant.
Do you?
That I'm not
he
sure.
sees. He's out on a date with.
That might be.
And she appears in a company of fine gentlemen.
Yes, that's
and
right.
he can't even look at. He hides his face
that's right.
from
He
her.
immediately.
That's
you're
right.
I forgot about
That's
that.
right.
Good
Showing at the very end that not only did she get over him, but she has lived a fulfilling life without him.
Yeah.
Yeah, she one-upped him. All right, so this one's tough. First of all, I want to backtrack a bit because where should we ship Madeline / Judy?
1 second.
All right.
Before that, well, she was like partially in the protagonist.
We didn't speak about her that much.
Camp. But before that, I think that other than Madeline / Judy, every other supporting character is mostly worthless. Even the guy that provides he's
even that many.
he's basically the lampshade. Gavin Elster, I believe is his name, is just a means to an end in this movie, and everybody else is nonsense. So that's, I mean, if I'm giving it a 1, it's for Mitch.
Sure. So I'll have to break it down. Yes, we didn't speak as much about Madeline, but I would certainly put her into more protag than secondary category, especially in the second half. And I thought actually her portrayal was quite well done. Like, I liked following along with her motivations, again, especially like having the reveal of her being the one who's like part of the scheme and so forth, but who is actually in love and so forth with Jimmy Scotty, right? So I'm just saying it's stronger evidence for 1 for me for protag. 4 secondary, like, I see what you're saying about Midge, but I was like, again, offended to a degree about her portrayal. Because, yes, you're right. She's depicted as somewhat independent. She's an artist. She's working, she's doing her thing, and she's not like fawning over him. But sometimes she is. Like, for example, the thing that sticks out. Right. But I didn't like when she painted the picture of her, and he's like, "Oh, not now," and he just like walks out and like almost disgust.
Stupid.
And then she like hits herself in the face like 3 times, like, "I'm so stupid. I wanted to do that." Like,
yeah.
I thought that was a terrible fucking turn to have her do.
2 things on that. 1, it was the painting of the
right, as a recreation of Carlotta. Yes.
So there's a little bit more context in just being given a painting. Why did you make me a painting of yourself? No, why did you make me a painting of you dressing up like the woman
that I clearly love?
Yes. And second of all, everyone's. I've definitely had reactions like that over embarrassing situations in my life. I don't believe it is out of... Yeah, it might be kind of... It's uncomfortable to watch. It certainly is.
Saying it's less sexist than I think it might be? Like, what do you mean?
I think that people have that reaction. It's a very uncomfortable reaction to watch because... especially if you kind of have suffered from that kind of anxiety before. But I think that it's in keeping with the... Yeah, Hitchcock's a little sexist. It's true. I mean, there's no
getting around it. Yeah.
But I don't think it's, especially as her character develops, it loses that kind of
It dropped
just
off a bit. Yeah.
doe-eyed. I love this guy, and that's all I'm about. To
Right.
not only having her identity all along out of him, but really showing that she can grow out.
I guess
past it.
the point you made at the end, and the fact that like you reminded me that she was there, and like he can't face her at the restaurant, or like decides to hide because she's clearly moved on and having a well fulfilled life without him. I guess that will sort of mitigate my initial like reaction of like terrible depiction. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'll give her probably. You're right, Steve. You almost refit me on it, both of you to a degree. So again, well done, my friends. A 1 for secondary, mostly for her. I thought Gavin actually was okay. He played like a good part. Like I didn't suspect him at first. Of course, like because it's noir, then you immediately should, like 100%, right? But like other than that, there weren't. You're right. There weren't too many. Like mostly window dressing. But I will say you convinced me on the Midge angle, if you will. So I'll end up giving it a 1 largely.
I want to mention that I thought that the Judy / Madeline role was actually way more regressive than Midge was. In terms of if we're going to talk gender politics,
but her character is more fleshed out.
It kind of. I don't know about that. Like what about her character what can you say about her character?
She ego.
Loved him, and that's basically it. Like that was her whole fucking point in this movie.
I'm not going to argue actually much against that. I'm just going to give a little bit. She's supposed to be a young woman in this. I believe 25, or the actress was
something
20,
like that.
Where Jimmy Stewart was 50, which is a huge age difference, and actually one of the first movies that really showed, from what I understand.
Creepy.
Yeah, so if she's supposed to be a young girl in this, it is kind of that sexist that, like, oh, this is how a young girl would behave in a situation like this. If to do like kind of be where Midge is more of an adult who can make more adult decisions. She's not at that point yet, but I think that's mildly sexist too if you take that angle. So I'm going to say that you're right on for the most part.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll
like that's my entire. That was my entire. That's actually my biggest problem with this is like Judy's
depiction. What?
attempt to be like flailing at being like a whole person with writing the letter, and then kind of just regressing into this role of like doing whatever the hell he says, and like that's what made me cringe. And we'll talk about that with dialogue in a minute and stuff like that. But
we sure will.
That was my and this isn't even going to affect the score for this, but like that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I just want to rap with you guys.
All right.
I don't know why I said that. That's what I wanted to talk about, like in terms of that. Like even though it has nothing to do really, because I look at her as almost a protagonist in this.
Yeah, well, that's what we said.
But yeah, so I'm gonna give secondary characters a 1, and we'll talk about dialogue in a minute.
Well, I was gonna just address quickly at the end what you said. You said to like what were Madeline's like personalities like. She was a young woman, as you said, and wanted to like. She thought she could get in on this scheme. Yes, she was a mistress of another older, wealthier man. Sure, but she thought she could like enact this scheme, and then she found herself cast aside. So then she was trying to survive on her own. Like all I'm saying is like I think she was more. Well,
she was never trying to survive on her own though. Like that part of her personality never was shown. You know, like it was briefly like hand waved, but she apparently never even wanted to do that. And like that was what bugged me. It was like
I guess like you were saying, but she was forced to and did for at least until Jimmy Stewart creepily found her again. She's portrayed as like basically a gold digging like love object in this fucking movie. Yeah. The more I think about that,
argue that.
No, I cannot because you're right. I just thought like again, my instinctual like impression was she was more well portrayed and more fleshed out than Midge, but maybe you've convinced me that the opposite is true.
Yeah, I was gonna say
to a degree.
I don't know anything about her other than she wanted money and she loved Jimmy Stewart.
All right,
I know nothing about her personality.
See, neither of them know what love is.
I agree with that.
Yes,
and that was the point.
Me too.
That was the point that Hitchcock was trying to make, but he did it through this person who was basically
through a sexist angle.
Like I said, a gold digging love object.
Sure. All right. I mean,
that's what fucking made me cringe.
Yeah, was uncomfortable
in the
about
end.
it.
And yeah, that was the whole thing that bothered me about this movie.
And you're right. I guess that does tie a bit into style or dialogue. I'm sorry, which I believe is on to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm again at the outset. I'm looking at a 0 because of but then I'm stopped in my tracks a bit because going back to what you said. Should I take into account the fact that it was supposed to be that way? Like, I feel like if you're supposed to feel uncomfortable when Jimmy Stewart starts like, oh, I want you to dress in her suits and dye her hair and do what I say. And then I want you to look just like her. And she's complying to go along with it because, quote unquote, ostensibly they're in love.
Not only complying, but watching her reluctantly get beat down.
Yeah.
Over.
Yeah.
Like, of course, she protests at first. She's like, no, like, I'm my own person. And but of course, she knows that he's going mad because he thinks that they're separate people, or at least slowly discovering that they're not, but she's trying to keep it together and so forth.
Here's my one.
Okay.
Right here. And this is a very famous line from this film, which I knew the line before if you let me change, if I let you change me, will you love me? And her kind of plea of like just her giving and surrendering at that moment is such a good and haunting line.
I agreed. Like, the thing that grated on me, I guess, is when that's happening, like, there's a line he says to her a number of times when he's trying to convince her to, go back to changing her and dressing her as Madeline was. Mm-hmm. He's like, it can't matter to you, like, what you look like. Like, what? Like, she's not her own person? Of course it should matter to her.
She's not to Jimmy's... Like,
right, that's what I'm saying. That's where the very uncomfortable angle certainly comes in. And that's why, as a mark against the dialogue, for me... But at the same time, like I said, if that's supposed to be truly the intent and it's supposed to invoke that feeling in you because it's clearly an unhealthy relationship and an unhealthy setup, given what has come before for these characters, then maybe that is fine. Like, I definitely cringe and rolled my eyes literally at this dialogue.
Agree.
But perhaps that was because it was intended for you to have that reaction via the nature of the story. So now I'm not sure what the fucking score is.
All right, so let me see if I can perhaps
All right, go ahead.
Give you guys something to think about. So I agree that this dialogue was supposed to make you cringe. It was supposed to make you feel bad for her. The problem was that the dialogue in this movie could have been used to show who she was as a person in this toxic shitty ass relationship that she was in, and it didn't even attempt that. And that's why I'm going to give it a 0. It's not that it was bad dialogue, it's that there wasn't the dialogue that there should have been.
And maybe that's an important sign of the times, but
explore to explore all the characters. And and it's the sign of the times, sure, but it's a sign of Alfred Hitchcock, I think, like and what he was willing to give his actors. And I love his style. I love what he does with camera angles.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but
and what he does with a story. A lot of times, but there is this thing that in this movie that really bugged me was the fact that one of the most important characters in the movie was not a real fucking person, basically.
What's funny is one of the most important characters in the movie you didn't meet until halfway through.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yes.
But but
that's part of you trying a bold new direction.
So that I think is a good turn, right? Like whereas you don't meet Judy, I don't know why you meet Madeline and not Judy until
it's a very Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, exactly. You meet Madeline.
There's so many air quotes. I don't know what to do.
But I think that is a great turn that this movie makes. I think the bad turn that happens is you see this woman who is super important, one half of the movie in the second half of the movie, in this shitty relationship that is, I have no problem with them showing a bad relationship like this. The problem that I have is that they turn her into a nothing.
She's shoved off into the background.
She's a object that he can throw his malice at, and you don't understand who she is other than this object that he's trying to make into the woman that he ostensibly loved. And so for that, I'm going to give dialogue a 0. I guess I could have gone with a 0 in this in several different places for this specific thing. I'm going to give it to dialogue. It could have also gone under protagonist for her, I suppose.
Yeah, I was attempting to do that, but I think you're right. I think I agree at this point with taking off points here
in
specifically
terms
for
of
that.
in terms of the way that I saw the movie, that's how I felt about it when I came out of it.
It's a very fair point. You mentioned, Scott, that it might be a sign of the times. True, but you're right. There's for this to hold up through time, this is a strike against it because it could have been a more complex character, and the dialogue is definitely the malice of Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, I like that phrase as well. But yeah, I think it backs up. I mean, you're giving a 0.
I'm going to give it a 0.
I think it backs up my initial reaction to do so, as supported by what you specifically, Stevo, said, and right there at the end as well, E.
Well, I'm going to be very foul here for a moment. But
FOWL? Like you could be a chicken?
We're doing we're doing Vertigo, not the birds, dude.
Oh, okay, you're right.
Oh,
sick pun.
This was Hitchcock giving a hand job to San Francisco.
Sure.
This was a tourist video for San Francisco.
Come visit San Francisco and get embroiled in a crazy plot.
But I mean, this is also, it's Hitchcock, who is one of the best directors of all time, and his shots are spectacular. Even as funny as it is now, his shots of Vertigo are still kind of neat to see.
Oh man, that between movies, I suppose, that whole fucking animated scene was amazing.
The acid trip with Jimmy Stewart's face.
That was incredible.
That's what I have in my notes.
I fucking loved it. I don't know if you liked it as much. But...
Well, I did not. But that's sorry.
Pink Floyd, Jimmy.
Yeah. Dude, I have wrote down The Wall.
Jimmy and the Wall.
Yo, that'd be amazing.
That would be the log line.
Yes. But no, like, I agree, of course. Like, what I do have my serious thoughts are Alfred Hitchcock, lush colors. He was a master of fantastic shots, framing, lighting, etc., and so on. Like, you cannot argue with that in this film. If nothing else, he was a genius at putting it all together and making it all work. And yeah, the hand job for San Francisco is funny, but that means he made San Francisco look awesome. In like even like the shots of the interior apartments and all that stuff. So yeah, like yes, the Jimmy Stewart like acid trip out scene, like the effects actually held up quite nicely. It's just the fact that he had to use a picture of Jimmy Stewart's face coming at me, like while other acid.
Like, God damn it, I hate you, Jimmy Stewart.
What a bad trip.
Yeah, it's like the fucking Dumbo thing when he gets drunk, except for Jimmy Stewart. So like, but to be fair, it still holds up. It's just that, of course, my bias comes through there. But yeah, of course, I don't see how you can ever give Hitchcock a 0 to style in anything, regardless of all other factors. So
there is I love the music on this. Or like the
good
the
call.
Score was
I was kind of leaving that for
fucking
you.
incredible. The sound effects were great. There's one shot that I will probably remember until the day I die. Is the overhead shot of the bell tower after the initial her jumping off scene, where
the transition between
there,
part 1
where
and part 2.
the I guess priests and the nuns are climbing up on the roof, they get on the roof, and you see from the aerial view Jimmy Stewart come out, and then go around the corner of the building.
Dude, I thought to myself, how did he get that fucking shot?
That was one of the most brilliant shots I've ever seen in my life. It was so fucking perfect. I loved it so much.
I agree.
And I would have given this movie a 1 for style if everything else in the entire movie sucked, which it didn't.
No, but
yeah,
right.
like it.
That is Exhibit A.
It's fucking Hitchcock. It's the style is there. It's fucking great, and I'm gonna give it a 1 strong one.
It absolutely holds up.
All right, and Steven, on to you with the recommendation.
So I will say, watch this movie with a trigger warning. if you're in a
I don't mean to make light of it. Man.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I'm kind of laughing about it, but like there are moments of this movie that are deeply uncomfortable, and if you're in a real shitty relationship, don't watch this movie. It's a good film. It's not the greatest film in the world. I wouldn't put it up there in the running for best film ever, like some people have. But I think it's definitely worthy of being on the AFI Top 100. There are issues with it, as we've talked about, as I've mentioned. But in terms of just straight up brilliant filmmaking, cinematography, directing, the audio in this movie. It's fantastic. If you want to look up how to do a really complex plot the right way, you could do worse than this movie. And yeah, I would say check it out. It's not going to be a waste of your time.
Your mileage may vary. I'm looking at a 0, and here's why. I would never put this in my top 3 or 5 or even possibly 7 Hitchcock films. It would be like low on the list of all Hitchcock films. And yeah, like, I don't understand. Like, it's fine. It's on the AFI. I don't know if it should be number fucking 9. Like, it could be probably back a little bit. And like you said, I believe it's the same bit of research where it was like the greatest British film. I believe was a British institution that chose it as such. Mm-hmm. I don't see how that could be the case, but like, I get it. Like because it's him and it's legacy, I suppose. But I would say watch like 5-6 other Hitchcock films versus this. I do not want to see Vertigo again. And I guess that's just my personal taste, but I literally wouldn't recommend it. People say, should watch Vertigo. I would say no. You should watch any other Hitchcock film, or many others at least, before this one. So while, like, yes, we can give it its aspects, but what you just said, like, the directing, like, all of that can be true of any Hitchcock film. You know what I mean?
It's true.
Right? So, like, because this one I thought was one of the weaker ones, if not the weakest I've seen of his work, then I cannot in all good faith recommend it at this point.
Well, you just had the reaction of the audience at the time. It was considered one of the weaker Hitchcock films for a very long time. In recent years, critics like myself have come along.
And what?
Critics like myself.
No, seriously, it's got like a resurgence?
It did get a resurgence.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, fine, but...
because they looked at it as... They felt that it was ahead of its time and created a lot of things that came later.
Perhaps.
And they say it's the best films of all time. I might disagree. I think it might be my favorite Hitchcock film. If I might not watch the first half again, but I might start it
like halfway
in
through
the insane asylum and watch it from there, because I think it's a perfect film.
You mean when Jimmy Stewart's in the insane asylum, not you?
Har.
Yes.
Indeed.
So I'm going to definitely give it a strong recommendation. It's a tough initial, and then it's well worth the entire battle through it. And it's a weird thing that I say for the best of Hitchcock, but I don't know. One of my favorite films of all time is I'm a blank on this.
You forgot the name of his favorite film.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Okay.
And that is a very a deep look into toxic relationships. I think this is up there it's on par with that look. So anyway, we give out the scores. I gave it a 9. Steven gave it an 8. Scott, you gave it a 6. Giving it an overall of a 7.6.
You know what? That's fine. I think. Again, I think
it's gotta be fine.
At this point,
That's what we're giving it.
Well, at this point, we've reviewed. This is like the 3rd or maybe 4th Hitchcock film reviewed, which I think all the others have scored higher than this. I believe.
Yes, but
offhand.
you also.
Yeah, I scored it lower because of that.
So you directly influenced that,
right?
But yeah,
but I still think it's fitting enough. I don't know. I don't have much more to add. It's just not my cup of Hitchcock tea, if you will, at this point.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, and look out below. Here with Stephen Mosi.
I'll be falling to my death very soon.
You will. And Scott Dilla.
And we'll see you next time. Good night.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.